Okay, I'm back.
Great. Getting the links ready to go out.
Well, maybe this is this better?
Hmm. On YouTube, it's still showing up as Bitcoin maximalism, but whatever. It's not the final version.
That's weird.
Yeah, it does shit like that sometimes.
Okay. If I get a call from the client, then I have to attend to it while we do this.
Okay. We'll just cut it out of the recording.
Yeah.
So I'll go to Gab. I'll go to Facebook. I'll go to Twitter. Are you going to share it on Noster?
Oh, yeah. To our one follower on Noster, which is also us. So,
Okay. I'm getting the same fact check that you mentioned about from Facebook, something about COVID-19 vaccines.
yeah. This post has been fact checked by our experts, and it turns out that, in fact, the vaccine ingredient SM25 is not. Oh, but this post is about Ukraine bombing or someone, or
Yeah.
post is about something completely different. Oh, but our fact checkers, our privy council of omniscient fact checkers.
Right.
I mean, it's so silly. How do you expose this? I mean, this must look really shitty for them. It's like our fact check has determined this post contains false information,
Right.
but your fact check hasn't even read the post. Just giving me some blanket generic. It's so bizarre.
Can
Like
can you
they must look bad for them, or they just really genuinely don't give a shit and are just taunting us.
Yeah, or I mean, is does Facebook really still have its shit together? I don't even use it anymore. I don't know.
Yeah, they're bleeding followers.
Can you send me your spreadsheet? If I share the screen, we both show up. If you share the screen, only I show up in the little corner.
Yeah, the thing is, yeah, I'll send it to you. But I was going to start it from scratch because if I'm like as I go through it and create the sheet, I think it'll be a better learning experience for the viewer. But I'll send you the final sheet.
Because I really want your. If you're the one going through the sheet, I really want your video there. And it would be too much of a pain in the ass to have you tell me what to put in the spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, probably much less of a pain in the ass than making it work, so we can just do all this like everyone else does it.
What do you mean?
Well, I share or I do it on my screen, and both of our heads are visible. But I mean,
Let me think.
well, I mean, every time we have this discussion while we're doing it, right? So think about it while we're not doing it, and then, uh, or unless you think you can fix it right now
Well,
on the
well, that's
fly.
the thing. If I can think of an easy solution now, I'll do it. If I realize it's going to take longer, I'll say skip it.
Right, but no, but I mean, if there was an easy solution, then you would have done it the past 10 times, right?
Not necessarily because I'm learning this shit on the fly. Um,
Where did I put the sheet? Where did I put the sheet? Save as. Oh, okay, okay. There it is.
share your screen. Let me see if this is a quick fix.
So now I go to Irida. Content episodes. SVB.
Because you're right fucking there. Why can't I just take you and stick you right here? What if I do this? What if I do this, Nima?
Okay, I just sent you the sheet. But I mean, if you, I think it's fine. If I explain it and you don't see my face, then so be it. That's fine.
I may have an easy solution. Just a sec. That's right. That's right. Because when I do this, that happens. Because for whatever reason, Yeah, okay, we'll do it later.
Okay.
I'm seeing the issue that I ran into before, and I don't really understand why it works that way.
Okay.
Okay. All right, go ahead and share your screen.
Stop share.
All right, I'm going to do one last audio test locally. Go ahead.
Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, that passed. Can you check YouTube and see if our sound is coming through? Ah.
Testing, testing.
Testing, testing.
Yeah, coming through.
Okay, I'm looking
Can you change the name of that stream?
on YouTube.
Yeah,
I did. It should be changed.
it's not. It says Irida TV Live, Bitcoin maximum.
Fucker, I fixed this. Okay, hold on. We'll have to fix the link that we send out. I should wait a minute. Wait. Maybe not. Maybe not. Title: Silicon Valley Bank and the banking system. Good enough for now. Think of a better name later.
Yeah, that's fine.
That should have fixed it. Refresh.
Okay. Yeah.
Did that fix it?
It's loading. Yeah, it's fixed.
Okay, good. All right, ready?
We'll do it live.
Okay. Well, no.
We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
Hello, this is Dylan Moore and Nima of Irida TV coming to you. We're doing it live on March 29th, 2023. It is Wednesday, and today we got to talk about some banks. Nima and I have been chatting about this in the background for a while. Ever since the Silicon Valley Bank crash, we felt the necessity to make a show, but we weren't privy to the details, and Nima has gone and looked up some details for us. I'm pretty excited about this because I haven't seen it myself yet either. So Nima, welcome back. I should say I should welcome myself back. I was in Japan for the last 3 weeks. But welcome back, everybody, including me and Nima. Konnichiwa. Yes. Nima, just before we get into this, I just wanted to say I actually went to a bank in Japan to look up buying a house. Do you know what interest rate they said we would likely get?
Like 1% or so.
0.3.
Wow. For a 30-year?
For a 40-year.
Wow.
Immediately I was like, can I just start gobbling up houses for free in Japan and turning them into short-term rentals?
Right.
That's still a possibility. We were there for 2 kids. It was hard to make it to the bank to have these conversations, but
I mean, it's amazing given that the prices have also come down so much. And the rates are so, I mean, like over the 40 years.
Well, there's so many people dying in Japan. For every one person that's born now, 2 people die. There's just too many fucking houses.
Yeah.
It's wild. The government is literally giving houses away because they have so many empty houses that apparently, the person dies, nobody inherits it, and it just goes back to the government. That they're
Interesting.
literally giving houses away.
Right, right. So this is always, to me, Japan is a cautionary tale because people always say real estate will always go up and up and up. Well,
No, won't.
not always. We have a big example here where it's not the case.
Yeah. I was also told, I haven't confirmed this yet, and would only be able to do this because I have a Japanese wife. 0% down.
Wow.
So I can get a 40-year loan, 0% down at essentially 0% interest for a fucking house. Which are way cheaper than here to begin with, right? I mean, like one half or one third the price. It's wild. Anyway, I bring that up because I was recently in Japan and we're about to talk about banking. Silicon Bank crashed. No, actually, it didn't crash. It was closed for reasons that may have been stupid, as we're about to get into. And either one or two more banks have gone after that. And the whole audience that we're used to discussing, not our audience, but people who typically report on such things, are going, Peter Schiff, for example. It's here! It's finally happening! The whole shit's gonna come down! Ah!
Right, the usual suspects always come out of the woodwork and have something to say along the lines of, "Oh, it's gonna get much worse," and "Oh, yeah, I told you so," and "Oh, the inflation and the collapse and the implosion and the blah blah blah. And as far as I know, there has not been any implosion yet, or of any
Well, and then as far as
other than the bank shutdown and this and that,
Well,
which was bureaucratic move. But yeah, we'll get into that.
Well, and then let's talk about before we get into the details. Let's kind of rehash kind of the MMT like as fast as we can for someone who might just jump into this going, what are these guys talking about? Right? We're looking at this through the MMT lens, the modern monetary theory lens, which we believe accurately denotes that the government is the issuer of the currency. It gives license to the banking system to create money out of nothing. That's what a loan is. It creates money out of nothing. And that a lot of the regulations that are either, via Congress or via the Federal Reserve or whatever regulating authority is regulating that bank are very, very arbitrary. For example, the reserve requirements, right? If you listen to, for example, the Austrian or the Peter Schiffs or the Alex Jones or the whoever, you'll often come away with a fractional reserve theory of the banking system, which says, okay, there's this money multiplier effect where if they have $10 in the bank, they can lend out $100, right? That's the fractional reserve banking system. And depending on whatever the reserve rate is, that affects their multiplier. So if you reduce the reserve rate, they could get more and more strained in their lending. Well, that's actually not the case at all. The bank makes the loan first, it creates the money out of nothing, and if there's a reserve requirement, it turns around and finds those reserves later, and those reserves are always available.
Sorry to interrupt you. We
Yeah.
will get into that now in the tutorial that I've kind of prepared
Perfect.
in my mind. So
Perfect.
all of those things we will get into.
Okay, well, let me wrap this up by saying a lot of what the doomsayers use to say, okay, this is how the banking system works, and this is proof of what I'm saying is true. A lot of it is arbitrary bullshit regulation, like the reserve requirement, which does nothing other than be an annoyance to the banks.
It is like a tax on the banks, essentially.
Yes, because they have to hold on onto money that they otherwise could just go off and invest smartly with. So with that, Nima, I'm going to hand it over to you. Let's get into what actually happened at Silicon Valley Bank. Did it have to happen, and is it indicative of what's going to happen through the rest of the banking system?
Right. So I think so. Let's start with just a very simple intro into banking, like a tutorial of how banking works and what a bank does in the course throughout the course of being a bank, right? And then we will get to SVB's situation, the snapshot of their balance sheet, basically what we're going to be going through now is kind of like going through the history of SVB in a compressed time scale. um, so I'm going to share my screen because I have something prepared here. Share. Okay. So actually, I will just start with a balance sheet model. Okay. Um, I'm gonna utilize sort of corporate bookkeeping jargon, lingo methods, and if that's something that's completely alien to the viewer, then just bear with me. It's not, necessarily. It's not that complicated.
I'll,
Actually,
I'll try to act like an uninitiated because I
right.
kind of am, so I can ask stupid questions that
Exactly.
maybe somebody else might be thinking of.
Exactly. Exactly. So, um,
So we got step one here, right?
yeah.
We're gonna set up a bank.
So step one, right? So Nima wants to start his own bank. Okay, I want to start my own bank. I want to found a bank. What is the assets and liabilities thing? So this is a balance sheet that every corporation compiles every quarter or so, which tells the owners, the government, everyone interested, all the stakeholders, is the stuff that the company owns. In other words, the assets, which shows up on the left-hand side, and how was the stuff they own funded, which is on the liabilities side.
And
Okay.
this is double entry bookkeeping,
Double
right?
entry bookkeeping.
Every asset
Exactly.
has a liability attached to it somewhere.
Exactly. So let's say I start a bank now. Actually, I think it's maybe more fun if I just start typing it up
Do it.
as I go. Let's see how that works. So step one, we have assets, liabilities. So Nima starts a bank, right? What do? I buy a building so I can have my bank for $100,000, and I, sorry, actually 100,000 building, and I funded it all out of my own savings. Okay, so we start with a building that I purchased for $100,000 of my own money.
Which means the company owes you $100,000.
Yeah, which means I own all the assets in this business right now. I put in $100,000 and I bought a building where I can put my bank in, and that's it. Okay. Very simple. Obviously, in the real world, don't look at this as one building, but it would just represent all the fixed assets of a bank, right?
Right.
We start with nothing and we buy a building, and it's all funded out of my own pocket. So it's
Well,
a
and
hundred.
then if you had $200,000, $100,000 went to the building, and then you stuck another $100,000 into the bank, that would show up here too.
Yes,
Right.
yes. But I'm not going to do that right now because I want to show people where the reserves come from and all that stuff.
Right.
So we're really just starting with a building, and I funded out of my own money, and
And the bank has $0 in its own bank account.
correct. Um, we get a bank account at the Fed at this point, right? We've complied with all the requirements, all the regulations, and all that nonsense. So let's say we have a bank account we have a reserve account now with the Fed. That's at $0, right? We have a reserve account at the Fed, fresh account, starting from scratch. The Fed is okay. Here you go. Here's your account with us. So just as you and I have checking accounts at Citibank or wherever, Citibank has a checking account at the Federal Reserve Bank, and that's their reserve account. Okay.
And only banks are able to do that. You and I aren't
Yes.
able to do that, right? Okay.
Only banks are able to have a reserve account, basically, a checking account. Fed. And at the end of the day, all assets always have to match all the liabilities. So that's why it's double entry bookkeeping. We're at 100,000 on the left side, and that's the building. On the right hand side, 100,000, it's out of equity. So I funded it. Okay, now step two. What do banks do? Banks make loans. Okay. That's how they make a profit. So we still have a $100,000 building here. But now let's say I make a $500,000 loan. Okay. So Dylan wants to expand his business and build a factory, and he's a good credit risk. We go through underwriting, go through all that shebang, and we make a loan to Dylan, which means basically we sign a contract. Dylan, you now owe us $500,000 over the next
10
15,
years.
10 years, and you pay us 10% interest, let's say, every year. Okay, so we closed the loan at $500,000 loan to Dylan. I'm gonna write Dylan here. And on the right hand side, once again, we still have our $100,000 equity. And now, how do we fund this loan? Well, we mark up Dylan's checking account deposit. Right, Dylan, now we have $500,000 checking account. Dylan.
Now, just so I'm clear on this, so the $500,000 asset of a loan, or the $500,000 loan is an asset because that's $500,000 that I owe you.
Correct.
The $500,000 is also a liability because that's the $500,000 I can walk to the bank and go, okay, I need some of my $500,000 now.
Yeah, immediately available money. Exactly.
Right.
That's what we owe you now. In exchange for your guarantee to pay us $500,000 over 10 years at 10% interest, we owe you $500,000 in immediately available money.
What, and then more than likely, just to make this a little bit more realistic, if I bought a business or I bought a factory or something, that $500,000 would never even hit my bank account because it would be a part of the closing and immediately go to whoever I was buying the place from.
Yeah, I think it's possible.
I mean, that's what I did recently.
Okay. Right. So, depending on the kind of arrangement, the type of loan you get, it could be a personal, or it could be just a business loan or line of credit, in which case it would just basically be marking up your bank account with $500,000 basically your statement now says you have $500,000 in your checking account. Okay.
And then this creates the money out of nothing.
Exactly. At this point,
this is the magic wand that goes, woo, $500,000 now exists. It didn't exist before.
Exactly. So step 1 is set up bank. Step 2 is make loan. Now, step 3, Dylan buys factory.
Oh, I see. You're breaking this into two.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
So Dylan buys the factory. Maybe it's nicer if I make these bold. Maybe not, but I'll still do it. Okay. Once again, we have our assets, liabilities. So what happens now? Okay, we still have our $100,000 building, our fixed assets. We still have the $500,000 loan, Dylan 10%. We still have our $100,000 in equity. But now what happens? So Dylan
took all the money.
Well, yeah, Dylan takes the Nima Bank checkbook, writes a check to Bob, who sells him a factory, and Bob is banking with Bank of America. Okay, so Bob presents the $500,000 check to his bank, Bank of America, and Bank of America is going to present this check to the Federal Reserve and say, here, bank so-and-so, Nima Bank owes us $500,000 in reserves. So now that bank will hit our so the Federal Reserve will deduct $500,000 from our reserve account and mark up Bob's bank with $500,000, but we have no $500,000. So we need to borrow $500,000 from the Fed. So now we have a $500,000 Fed loan. Let's say we pay them about 5% for that loan.
And then that 5%, is that the interest rate that the Fed is always talking about? We raised rates 75 points or dropped them 25 points or whatever. That's that interest rate?
It's kind of like that rate. It's a little higher than that rate because this is like the most extreme example where I go directly to the Fed
Okay. You
to
don't.
borrow this
It
money.
doesn't have to happen this way.
Right, because the bank, the discount rate that they talk about is the interbank lending rate, which is me borrowing reserves from another bank. Okay, and we'll get there shortly. I just
Okay.
want to
But I mean, this is the way it, like, fundamentally, all of the things not working, this is the way it works.
yeah, if we were to start from the very scratch, right, that says no other banks yet or whatever, then this is how it will work. And to understand the entire system, um, you would just we could just multiply this entity here as many times as we want. We can have this bank, another bank, another bank. They all have this kind of balance sheet, and every individual too, by the way, right? Dylan has his $500,000 liability to us and a $500,000 checking account. So to Dylan, these two are reversed.
Right.
Sorry, these two are, his checking account is an asset, liabilities on the liability side. But
Now,
all of these like neatly tie into one another,
now
and that's
when, sorry to interrupt, when the $500,000 Fed loan is taken, the reserve account still remains zero.
well, yeah, because I mean, technically, the reserve account
It's
goes
negative
into
500,000, right?
negative 500,000. But then I borrow the reserves from the Fed to bring it back to zero, basically.
Mm.
So that's
Okay.
why there's a Fed loan of 500,000 and reserve.
Okay, so the reserve account has to be zero. Do I have that right? Or should I just shut up and let you keep talking?
um, well, it has to. Yeah, I mean, technically, this could be also considered an overdraft at the Fed, right?
Right.
Because it's my reserve account at the Fed, and I've borrowed $500,000 in reserves from them to to pay that to cover my reserve account, basically. So technically, there'll be two steps, right? First, it's the reserve account is minus 500,000.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't have that, right? I can't just
It can't be negative.
well, it can be only be negative if I then promise to pay the Fed an interest rate for in exchange for them extending an overdraft on the
Right.
reserve account.
And then also, I think this is important to point out. This is the arbitrage that the bank makes. This is how they make their money, right? They lend out
Exactly.
at 10 and they borrow at 5.
Exactly.
And then the Fed makes the money out of nothing.
Exactly. The Fed
Yeah.
creates this loan out of nothing, just as we created this checking account out of nothing, right? The Fed creates it. And now keep in mind, these numbers, like there are regulatory requirements. You can't just have one loan of 500,000
Right.
when all your assets, blah, blah. I'm ignoring all of that because it doesn't matter. It doesn't change the fundamentals of the system fundamentally.
Well, and then this, looking at it this way, this also shows how the government, the Federal Reserve, is still the one fundamentally making the money here. Right. So creating the money out of nothing. So, okay, the bank gets to create the money out of nothing, but if it can't turn around and go to the Federal Reserve and create the money out of nothing over there, it can't actually make that loan.
Exactly.
Because that puts its reserve account negative.
Exactly. Except, like, we'll get to that. Now,
Okay.
I just want to point out this is the easiest version of doing it. No bank really does this, right? No bank really goes to the Fed then immediately to borrow this money. But this is the lender of last resort option that's always available to every bank, right? They could go to the Fed, borrow $500,000. However, what they're going to do now is because they don't like to pay 5% to the Fed, they can instead go to. So now we go to step 4. We replace that Fed loan with a reserve loan from another bank. Okay, so we bank borrows reserves from another bank. That's our step 4. So once again, we have our assets. We have a $100,000 building. We still have our $500,000 loan as an asset. Loan, Dylan, 10 And we still have our $100,000 equity. And now we just get a $500,000 reserve loan from another bank. And let's say we pay 4.5% for that one, right?
So we just saved 0.5%.
Exactly. So now we've improved our profit margin a little bit by doing this. In reality, most of the time, the bank will do this one right away if they're short reserves, right? Now, what's even better than
Depositors.
exactly. What's even better than paying 4.5% to another bank is to get depositors. So let's do this in the next step. Step 5, bank attracts deposits. So we still have, assets, liabilities. So now we still have 100. I'll just copy these.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to do that.
And this one we can copy over too. So now we get a $500,000 deposit, a savings deposit, let's say.
Let's say it's from Bob, who got the money for the factory, who decided to change banks.
Or maybe it's from Dylan, who just made major bank
Right.
from his factory project. And now he brings some money back. So we attract a savings deposit of $500,000 on which we only pay 3.5%.
And that's the rate they offer the customer to attract the deposit.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's why they do that. So they cut their costs of funds, basically, right? So now we went from a Fed loan of 5% to a savings deposit of 3.5%. These numbers are not exactly representative of the rates that are offered right now, but they are kind of in the ballpark.
This is making things a lot clearer for me too, because this is also clear why, if the Federal Reserve raises or drops rates, why the rates that we get as customers raise or drop.
Exactly, because banks compete for these deposits, right? So the banks look at each other and see, okay, how much are these guys paying, and how much are those guys paying? So what kind of rates do I have to offer in order to attract this cheaper?
And as long as it can never go higher than step 4, because if it went higher than step 4, you would just go to the interbank lending market because that's cheaper, right?
Exactly. And now the thing is, what we haven't looked at yet, what I'm going to do now is, so every 2 weeks or so, the Federal Reserve requires that the banks have about 10% in reserves of deposit liabilities. So for all the money that we have in deposits, like savings deposits here in this case, we have to have 10% of that in reserves. And how much reserves do we have right now? Well, we still have 0. We're still at 0 on our account, right? So now, what do? We have to get $50,000 in reserves, right? Because we're offering $500,000 in savings deposits.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we do that? Well, we get a $50,000.
Well, we could use any of the 3 previous steps, right?
Exactly. We could do any of these things. We can attract more deposits too.
Mm-hmm.
So what we could do, for example, we could say is we attract $50,000. Oh, sorry, but that would then in turn. So I'll make it easier. I'll just say we borrow $50,000 from another bank. Okay. So I'm going to insert here. Oh, sorry. Insert. So we borrow $50,000. Sorry. So we recognize $50,000 in new reserves. And how do we get those reserves? We borrow them on the interbank lending market. And we pay about, what did we say, 4.5% on that.
Mm-hmm. And so now a reserve account is now $50,000.
Our reserve account is now at $50,000. Exactly. Reserve account, 50,000. And also now our asset base is 650,000. And our liabilities of 650,000 as well. 500, 600, 650. So now we have a bank with $500,000 worth of loans, 100,000 fixed assets, $50,000 just sitting there in reserves. Now, the reserves earn us some interest rate or a low interest rate. Let's say it's what did I say here in my previous example? Like let's say we earn about 4% on these reserves. But we are allowed to, as a bank, we can put these reserves into treasury securities like treasury bills, treasury bonds, and maybe some agency securities or whatever. So we're gonna actually take a step back. Right now we have $50,000 in reserves, and that's the minimum, so we're required to hold these reserves, right?
So those have to be held and we do nothing with.
Exactly, those have to be held.
So that's 0%.
Well, yeah, we're borrowing for 4.5%, and we're getting 4% on these in my example right now.
But
so we're losing a little bit of money.
Why are we getting 4% for them?
Because the Fed has started paying reserves.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
and like the Fed's just paying you money for the reserves. Got it.
Right.
Okay.
Before that, they didn't used to do that, so then people would just but it doesn't necessarily fundamentally change the economics of it all. But yeah, it does punish you a little less if you're earning reserves. So if you're earning money on the reserves, it's obviously better than earning no money on the reserves. But even so, we had to borrow $50,000 from another bank. We're paying 4.5, and on this one we're paying 4%. So we're losing a little bit of money on this, but we have to do it for regulatory reasons. We have to have this kind of reserve.
Yeah, and that's you hit the nail on the head. That's a regulatory, arbitrary thing that could just literally go away, like it did during COVID, like it is in Canada. It could just be 0, and then that's fine. It's completely arbitrary.
Exactly. So now, let's say we attract some more deposits, like let's do a step 6 here. And this is actually kind of realistic because during the lockdowns, the government stepped in and marked up people's bank accounts, basically. If you know MMT, that's how this works, right? So a lot of people got their bank accounts marked up, and that we will now see how this has affected the banks, basically. So we're now going to simulate the cash, the avalanche of cash that happened during the lockdowns here in step 6. Okay, so, and we'll just assume they're checking deposits for the sake of simplicity. And checking deposits, the good thing about a checking deposit from the bank's perspective is there's no interest that they're paying on those. So those are kind of like the cheapest source of funding, but they're also they come and go all the time, right? But let's say what are we doing here now on the right hand side? I'm just going to copy these things. But also, let's say we're getting something like $500,000 in checking deposits now. So 500,000 people to transfer money from elsewhere to this bank, to our bank.
So now our reserve account is $550,000.
Exactly.
And now we have $500,000 that we don't have to just keep because of a regulatory reason.
Exactly. So we are allowed to. So we have 550 in reserves here. So now we have a total asset base of 1.15 million. And 1.5 million here as well. 500, 600. Yeah. So we have $550,000 sitting in reserves now. We only need 50,000. What do we do with the remaining 50,000? We invest that in treasury securities. Okay. So we step 7, invest.
And then Nima, just a reminder, I'm kicking myself for pick of the time. I've got a 1 o'clock meeting.
Right.
We're 15 minutes out, so
we'll see.
maybe we break this into 2 pieces.
Yeah, we'll see. I think this part we're almost done with, so we'll see. So now, instead of just having 550, all the 550 sitting in reserves, we'll diversify that a little bit. We leave 50,000. Sorry, because now our total deposits have gone to 500,000, 1 million. We now have to have $100,000 in reserves because that's 10%, right? So we have to leave $100,000 in the reserves. But we can invest $450,000 in treasuries. And let's just say for the simplicity, they pay 6%.
And I really see how the game here is really just minor adjustments in interest rates.
Exactly. It's cost optimization, right? We still have the loan to Dylan sitting here. Oops, what did I do? And then on the liability side, basically nothing changes. Everything's the same. We've just done some shoveling around on the asset side in this step.
Right, which gives us a better interest rate. Which is, out of all the stuff coming in and all the stuff going out, a little bit more comes in than is going out now.
Yeah. So what you could do technically, we can do is we can multiply 6% of 450,000, 10% of 500,000. You add all these up together and you come up with an annual profit based on this current constellation of assets, right? So that is what the bank is worth to the investing world, to the shareholders, etc. Is how much subscription revenue do we earn? Basically, it's like every time you make a new loan, you have signed on a new subscriber who pays you, like in this case, pays you $50,000 a year, right? So this is where we're at now. We have 100,000 reserves, 450,000 is sitting in treasuries. We have our $500,000, $100,000 building, etc. We've attracted checking deposits by offering merchant services or whatever. So obviously, as these checks get written out, our reserve account gets drawn down. Then we need to sell treasuries or borrow reserves from another bank or from the Fed. Or whatever we do, we have to shovel things around if we experience a deposit drain of any kind. So this is the situation. This is like the life cycle of your average bank. This is what they do, and this is where we are now. So now we can have a look at where Silicon Valley Bank stood at the end of 2022 with all this here in mind, right?
Oh, yeah, so let's do it.
Replace this with actual numbers, and I have these down here. Based the best of my ability to put these numbers together based on what I read in Wikipedia and other places, SVB pre-collapse had about 17. This is just my guess because they never really say exactly how much reserves they had, but they should have had about 17 billion sitting in reserves. And that also happens to be about 10% of the deposits that they had, which the deposit number, I know for a fact that this number is correct because this number is available.
Yeah, that's like a government available number right there, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like all of this. So basically, these two are what I had listed in our thing here under treasuries. Just they have a
Two different
short
types
term.
of yeah.
Yeah, they have a short term that they call marketable securities and a long term securities account. And they had $74 billion in loans and a total asset base of $209 billion. Okay. Now, the thing is, what stands out here is why is there so much treasury, like 90 billion treasuries and only 74 billion in loans? Why is that the case? Is that normal for banks to be doing that? And based on what I found, it's not necessarily normal. It is a symptom of the cash infusion that has happened during the lockdown phase. And I actually came across an article that we can have a brief look at here in the New York Times. I believe from, let's see, this was August 2021. So this was basically after all the cash infusion, all of that had happened, and in some states or in some cases was still going on. Banks are binging on bonds, but not because they want to. Banks are awash in deposits, and their customers are taking out fewer loans. So they have little choice but to buy up government debt, even if it means skimpy profits. So basically, I'm not going to read through all of this now, but
well, I mean, I think the title, I mean, that subheadline said everything.
Exactly. That sums it all up, basically, right?
Yeah.
This is what happened. So, because normally, if there's people that I can loan more money to that are good investments, and I'll do that, right? And I'll up this 74 billion to 80, 90, 100, 200 billion, however much I can loan out. And so what will then happen is, as those checks are written, as we saw earlier, a lot of these reserves will clear out from our account into other bank accounts. But the money we earn on loans is more money than we earn on the treasury bonds. So if this whole account gets drawn down here in exchange for building up a loan portfolio, that is good. That's what a bank wants, right?
Small side note here: Silicon Valley Bank told me no to the loan for my business acquisition. They were just like, "Yeah, we just do tech. Go away."
Yeah. Well, and also
not that the amount that I borrowed would have changed very much, but if this is a problem, fucking give me a loan.
what happened during the lockdowns was that people were given a lot of cash from the government and had less demand for loans. So the article that I just showed also bears it out a little bit, that people didn't have much demand for loans. So this was a problem for banks during this whole period, right?
So that they have a ton of deposits, not enough loans. Where are we going to stick the money? We might as well stick it into treasury securities because we'll get a little bit more interest and reserves.
Exactly. And that's what they did throughout 2022, which was the worst time to be doing this. They put a lot of money in long-term treasury bonds in their reserve account.
And this is before the rates started going up, right?
Right. It was kind of like during. However, still the rates kept on accelerating beyond expectations, right? So they ended up end of 2022, they're sitting in this 91 billion treasury bonds portfolio. And we can have a look at Wikipedia now. Collapse of Silicon Valley. So the story of Silicon Valley Bank, basically, I'll just read it real quick. Seeking higher investment returns in 2021, SVB began shifting its marketable securities portfolio from short-term to long-term treasury bonds. The market value of these bonds decreased significantly through 22 and into 23 as the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to curb an inflation surge, causing unrealized losses in the portfolio. So basically, if we go back to our model here, my $450,000 treasuries now suddenly we're only worth like
400,000.
400,000, right? So
now we're off by 50 grand.
Exactly, 50. So now we have 400,000. So now we have 1.1 million here. And same here. And how does this affect? Well, now this is a loss. Okay. This 50,000 is a loss. Where does that show up? Here? Well, it cuts into our equity. So now this is really not a good thing. Okay. What happened with the losses in this treasury bonds portfolio, because treasury rates were raised so quickly. Okay, I'll keep reading. I'll just keep reading on. Higher interest rates also raised borrowing costs throughout the economy, and some Silicon Valley Bank clients start pulling out money to meet their liquidity needs. To raise cash to pay withdrawals by its depositors, SVB announced on Wednesday, March, it had sold over 21 billion worth of securities, borrowed 15 billion, and would hold an emergency sale of some of its treasury stock to raise 2.25 billion. Okay, so now what happened here? These deposits started going out
because they had to make interest payments.
Yeah, for all kinds of, or people just moved their money to other banks, or people just pulled out money. A lot of money just went to big banks, and some of the banks that were paid were like First Republican banks like that. Those were the banks that were paid out of Silicon Valley Bank accounts. And so these deposits started clearing away from SVB. So that means that draws down the reserve account here, right? So let's say the deposits drop to 300,000, so 200,000 out. So now we're down here 100,000, negative 100,000. So how do we cover that negative 100,000? We have to sell some treasuries. Okay, so we draw down our treasury account to
200
to 200,000, and our reserves. So whatever happens here, I mean, they have to end up being adjusted based on the reserve requirements, etc. I'm just trying to illustrate here how this reserve drain has forced the bank to start selling their treasury securities. And these treasuries, through 2022, treasury values dropped by like 20, 30, 40% or so for long-term treasury holdings, because the rates went up so drastically from 1% to now 3.7% or so. So what happened here is that the bank had to realize some losses. Actually, I'll go back to the article where it says here, unrealized losses, blah, blah, blah. The announcement, coupled with warnings from prominent, caused a bank run. So people start pulling out deposits, okay? On the morning of March 10th, the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation seized SVB, placed under receivership with the FDIC. So this was on March 10th. An additional 100 billion were expected to be withdrawn during Friday. And about 89% of the bank's deposit liabilities exceeded the maximum insured by the FDIC. I mean, they point that out as if it's something unusual. I think this is not necessarily uncommon for banks.
I don't think so.
For banks to have so many deposits that are uninsured. I personally, I don't understand why. I don't understand why people just put their money in a treasury market, in a money market account that only invests in treasuries, because that's what I do. And then you never have to deal with any of this. You can write checks against it. You have no limits on withdrawals and deposits, etc. But okay, whatever. I want to skip to a section.
And I'm down to the countdown clock here.
I see. At that point, it's mark-to-market unrealized losses exceed 15 billion. Okay, this is the crucial point. So about 15 billion in losses on their treasury holdings is what they had realized, and that is understandably, that's not good. That's not good news for a bank with
they lost money. They're losing money, right?
Right. So because their annual revenue 2022, for example, was $6 billion. Okay, so $15 billion in treasury losses would probably put them at a loss at this point for this year. Not good, but also not
enough to kill a bank.
Exactly, not a disaster. And I guess we're down to
how about this? I got an idea. I don't know. I don't think there's too many people watching us right now. Let's follow this up on a local recording, and then we'll glue them together in the editing.
Yeah, sounds good.
You like that idea? Because this is my fault for sleeping in because I'm jet lagged. We were supposed to start earlier, but this is absolutely fascinating, and I now have a much clearer idea of the banking system, and I think everybody should have it. And I'd like to discuss more about the
What happened here?
what happened here, and what are the actual implications of that throughout the banking system, and just another example of if we really understand how this works, none of this shit has to happen.
Right. I mean, I think what's important to understand here is that, in the case of the 2008 financial crisis, the problem was here. This
Right,
thing,
the loans were bad.
the loans were bad. So we had to start marking down the loans from 500 to 400 to 300, 200, huge losses that ate up all our equity for assets that were our strategic business and what we're supposed to be doing. But what happened here was some losses on cash management resources that were somewhat poorly managed one time, So that's kind of like the difference that I see.
And it wasn't negligence. It wasn't their fault that the Fed raised rates so precipitously, right?
I mean, I think they did not need to put this money in these long-term treasuries where it comes down. They could have left it in short-term treasuries. It didn't look good in the moment when they were doing it, obviously, but turns out they would have fared much better if they had just left them sitting in short-term securities. But so this is a one-time loss, not good. I think a lot of banks will end up suffering this type of loss because of the systemic things that happen, because of the deposit flush.
I want to go into that in detail, but I'm at time. Let's catch us on the other side. I don't know if you're going to still be available when I'm done. We'll do a local thing, and then when we publish it, it'll all be together.
Yep, sounds good.
Cool.